All right, well, we are going to talk a little bit in this session about increasing giving and generosity in your church. To start with, I'm going to tell you a little bit about CFR, a little bit about me that helps understand where we're coming from, why we can speak a little bit into giving and generosity in the church world. So at CFR, the foundation of everything that we do, we decided this a few years ago, is that very top statement. We were started in 1980 to help churches with loans, but what we found in 43 years of working with churches, coming alongside them, one of the things we require of every church that has a loan with us is twice a year they send us an updated financial report. And we have loans with over 400 ministries currently. So that means we read 800 financial reports every year from churches all across the country. And so we've learned a little bit about church finance. And we have decided that we want to try and come alongside churches because of the things we've learned over the years and help them to be good stewards of the resources that they have. And that idea of stewardship is really that first statement. And the other statement's kind of how we live that out. The idea of stewardship is that God owns everything. He created it. It comes from him. It is his. In the meantime, we manage what he entrusts to us. But if he really owns it, we don't manage it for us, we manage it for God. So God owns everything. That means we manage everything that has been entrusted to us, and we manage it for God. So that being the center of what we do, over the years, the functions that CFR provides to churches, those have grown. We provide loans. I mentioned that's kind of how we got started, to provide loans for churches. That includes all those different types of loans for different purposes, different reasons. To fund those loans, if you were in the session yesterday, you heard that we don't actually have a money tree. Instead, we receive investments from people like you and me, churches, business owners. We use those investments to fund loans, but over the years, we have learned that we can be a stewardship resource to churches, that we can help churches be the best stewards of what they have. We can help individuals be the best stewards of what they have. And that's why we offer things like giving funds, which are basically donor-advised funds, to help people be strategic with their charitable giving and get some tax advantages that are part of that. But we also do capital campaigns, generosity initiatives with churches. So I have been a consultant in a number of different churches, helping them to increase generosity in their church. Sometimes you word it as accelerate generosity in their church, whether it was to pay down debt so that they pay less in interest and have more resources for ministry, or to avoid borrowing as much for a future project to raise funds for ministry. A little bit more about me. Now a disclosure here. Our marketing guy, I had a slide deck template and I sent it to our marketing guy and I said, can you kind of update this template for me? And he sent it back and included this page, and I have just left it in there because it's kind of funny. But the origin of the people confused me with Aaron Rodgers story is actually with Rick Grace with DHF. One of the first times we went to lunch, he said, hey, has anybody ever told you you look like Aaron Rodgers? And I said, Rick, I think you're one of my favorite people in the world. I don't like Aaron Rodgers, but to think that I look like an NFL quarterback, okay, I'll take that. And then the fact that even though I grew up in Illinois, that I now live in Wisconsin, of course the stereotype of cheese curds, left that in there as well. Truth is, I do like cheese curds, but that does not include fried cheese curds. Fried cheese curds are not cheese curds. Fried anything tastes the same, all right? So a cheese curd is authentic if it is fresh, room temperature, and squeaks when you bite into it. That's how you know you have a good cheese curd. Random fact, everybody seems interested in the cheese. So, anybody know where cheese curds come from? What cheese curds actually are? Okay, cheese lesson from the Wisconsin guy. So to make cheddar, you have milk, you add enzymes to the milk. That basically causes the proteins in the milk to do one of two things, either stay a liquid or coagulate is technically what it's called, become kind of chunky. The chunky part is curds. The part that stays liquid is whey. Curds and whey, Little Miss Muffet. So it's that process. You add the enzymes and you have curds and you have whey. So if you ever have anything with whey protein, they have used that part of, after that separation, they've used that whey to make it. They usually dehydrate it, it becomes a powder, and they add it to protein drinks and things like that. Curds, you can gather those, and to make cheddar, you pack them tightly, you press them into a wheel to get the moisture out, set them aside, and they age, and then you have cheddar. For the cheesemaker, inevitably, you will have filled several wheels, have pressed them, they're aging for cheddar, and you have some left over that won't fill another wheel. So they were the waste, the leftovers, and so he would feed them to his kids, they would eat it, it was just kind of the extra. So curds are really unaged, high moisture cheddar, but because of that consistency, they're not as hard as a cheddar and also not as sharp as a cheddar because they haven't aged yet. People develop a taste for them, and so now you can buy cheese curds, which is just unaged, high moisture cheddar. Right. If you learn nothing else in this session, you now can go home and tell somebody what cheese curds are. And you can tell them that you heard it from Aaron Rodgers himself. Now, we're gonna talk a little bit about money, and here's what I found is people sometimes get uncomfortable when we start talking about money and the church. And so what I found is if we can start with a video that maybe almost makes you feel even more uncomfortable, then when I talk about money, it doesn't seem so awkward at all. Wouldn't it be great if in our churches, in order to increase generosity, we had a magic solution, sort of a magic pill that if everyone took it, they would just be more generous? My friends at a church in Michigan, 242 Community Church, ran with that idea and created this little video here.
Team, it's been that way since the day you met. But your generosity dysfunction may not be a question of cash flow. Givalis for daily use helps you be ready anytime the moment's right. You can be more confident in your ability to be ready. And the same Givalis is the only daily tablet approved to treat general generosity as well as tithing at your local church. Tell your doctor about all your medical conditions and medications, and ask if your heart is healthy enough for generous activity. Do not take Givalis if you have an unhealthy aversion to joy, as it may cause an unexpected spike in happiness. Do not drink alcohol in excess with Givalis. Side effects may include love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, and all over favor of God. To avoid long-term injury, seek immediate medical attention for generosity lasting more than 4 hours. If you have any sudden decrease or loss in greed, selfishness, or underlying cheapskatery, continue taking Givalis as prescribed. Or if you have any Oprah-style reactions such as stop taking Givalis and get medical help right away. Ask your doctor about Givalis for daily use in a 30-tablet free trial.
All right. Obviously, that'd be really helpful, right? If we just had a pill that the doctor could prescribe and we would suddenly be generous. I have learned that generosity is not always easy, and I have had to grow in my own generosity journey. Sometimes I give a message in church as a sermon about my generosity journey, and I call it a tale of two shoes, or a tale of two pairs of shoes. And the first pair of shoes, early in my generosity journey, when I had just graduated high school, I had an opportunity to go to Haiti for a couple of weeks on a missions trip. I got to work a little bit with a young man named Michel, who worked at Christianville, the mission that we helped there in Haiti. And one day, Michel and I were walking across a field, and Michel looked at my shoes and turned to me and said, "I would like to have your shoes." Very bold, no hesitation in his ask. And I was kind of taken aback a little bit by it. Wasn't something I was expecting. And so I said in response to Michel, "I plan to wear these shoes home." Without any hesitation, Michel said, "I think you have more shoes at home." And he was right. And in hindsight, I recognized the fact that I had more shoes than I could wear at any given time, to Michel meant I was rich. And the fact I wouldn't give him a pair of my shoes when I had more at home meant I was not only rich, but greedy as well. And I hope that I've learned some things about generosity in my journey since then. Sometimes we're forced into generous situations. Shared a story last night. I think you guys learned for the first time. 2 years ago, we used to do, instead of the dinner being all together like it was last night, you would go out in groups to a restaurant. As a group, you decide where to go, groups of 8 to 12, whatever. And so the group that I was with included Benjamin. Some other folks from Indiana also included Brian Talty and his wife. And so we were at the Gin Mill, which is a nice place to eat. And we had all ordered, we were eating. They brought out a dessert menu, asked if anybody was interested in dessert. And I said, well, hey, go ahead and order dessert. I'm buying. And what I thought I was saying was I was buying dessert for everyone, but the waiter heard I was buying for everyone. And so when he brought the bill, he brought it to me, the entire bill for everyone. Well, in that moment, what do? Like, how do you say, oh, no, I was only buying dessert. So I bought everybody's dinner at the Gin Mill a couple of years ago. So sometimes you're forced to be generous when you weren't anticipating it just because of the awkwardness. So again, hopefully I've learned some things about generosity over the years. I do want to give some credit. A colleague of mine, Kent Fillinger, he represents CFR in Ohio and Michigan. He has done a lot of work studying churches. If anyone has seen the Christian Standard magazine, it's an old publication. Every year they do an annual church report among Christian churches, and they talk about attendance trends and giving trends and things like that. Kent is the one that prepares that report every year. And he uses that data to get all kinds of information. And so he was a resource for me in preparing for today's talk. And then also this book by Greg Gibbs, Creating a Culture of Generosity. The 5 things I'm going to tell you about, the words that I use, we're going to have 5 action words. They come from rewording what he calls 5 waves of generosity in your church that are kind of the outline for this book. Disclosure, I haven't actually read the entire book, but I kind of like those 5 ways, and so I reworded them to become my 5 things. So I can't say that I'm stealing from him because I haven't read enough of it to really be able to steal, but I like those 5 things. So these are the 5 ways. We're going to start with the first one. Teach about generosity. Teach about generosity in your church. We get sometimes kind of uncomfortable when it comes to giving and generosity. And I think what we need to do as a church to become more comfortable teaching about generosity is that we need to determine our convictions as a church about generosity and giving. How do we feel about generosity? What does our church believe about giving and generosity? And what do we believe that means for people who are a part of our church? Question to wrestle with. Why is it that one of Jesus' favorite topics is the church's least favorite one, oftentimes, to bring up? Are we missing something about money and generosity that Jesus understood, and so he talked about it a lot? Do we need to think about how we can teach about it more in a way that's consistent with how Jesus did? Another question to wrestle with. How could a deeper commitment to giving, teaching about giving, catalyze a spiritual revival in our church? We often fear that people will be turned off if we talk about money. Years ago, one of the wealthiest men I have ever met, he was a home builder in West Texas, Midland and Lubbock, built subdivisions in both, Beaton Bow Quality Homes. By the time Beaton Bow Quality Homes had built their 5,000th home, they had given away over $20 million to ministries around the world. So one of the wealthiest men I've ever met, one of the most generous men that I have ever met. I just texted with him last week to thank him again for how he impacted my generosity story. He came to me and encouraged me as a young pastor to actually do a generosity initiative, a campaign in our young church, because he said when our church did it, it was like a revival for me. How often have we thought about talking about money in that way? This could be something that actually in our being open, in our being candid, in our teaching what the Bible says about finances, that people could actually experience a spiritual revival. It happens. And we would often say it's the people with money we're afraid to turn off. Well, in his case, he was spiritually revitalized by that series. Little pet peeve of mine, we're going to talk about this a little more in a minute, but in our churches, we often say that we want to help people develop and use their spiritual gifts. If you have the gift of mercy, if you have the gift of serving, if you have the gift of teaching, we want to facilitate that. We want to help you grow in that. We want you to use that ministry to the best ability that you have, that you can, because God has given you that gift. Except for generosity. People have the gift of generosity. We don't feel that same burden to help them develop, to help them grow. And so Ron, who wants to be generous, who wants to grow in that, oftentimes feels like his church isn't doing anything. So then when they do this initiative, it's like a revival. They're helping him experience the joy of using the gift that God has given him. Sorry, that's a little bit of a soapbox for me, but I think it's something that churches need to recognize, is that's a spiritual gift that we can help people hone and grow in, just like other spiritual gifts. So a way that you practically can determine your convictions as a church is to, as leaders of the church, come up with basically a we believe list of statements about money and giving and generosity. As a church, we believe God rewards sacrificial giving. As a church, we believe it follows the example of Jesus to be generous. What are the things you believe about generosity that can serve as sort of a direction book for your teaching about generosity in your church? The second way to increase giving and generosity in your church, I think this is the most important one of all the 5, is to disciple people on their generosity journey. In the description for this workshop, I said, hint, it's not about the money when it comes to increasing generosity and giving in your church. It's not about the money because it's about this. It's about discipleship. It's about discipleship. It's about helping people move forward on their journey as disciples of Jesus, as followers of Jesus. When I work with a church that's doing a capital campaign, I will tell them up front, as I meet with the leaders for that campaign, I would say, we're going to figure out a financial goal, and we're going to share that goal. But that goal is our secondary goal. Whatever it is that we're trying to raise, that's secondary. The primary goal is to take everybody in our church on a discipleship journey. We want to move everyone forward on their discipleship journey. And for some people, that includes a commitment that they will make that will be part of your number goal. Some people may move forward on that journey, but are still not yet at the spot where they make a commitment. That's okay. We move them forward on that discipleship journey. That is the win. If we move everybody in your church a step forward on their discipleship journey when it comes to generosity, that's the most important thing. And the financial numbers, the money, becomes secondary. So think about, how are we going to mentor? How are we going to model generous discipleship and living? Figure out how to describe a generous disciple. Explain for people what that means in terms of actions, in terms of attitude. And then look at 4 or 5 levels of growth on that discipleship journey. So we will say we want people in our church to develop and grow when it comes to ministry, comes to serving others. So how do we move people along a discipleship journey? We'll say something like, hey, come to this behind the scenes tour. That's what the church I attend calls it, where we'll show you after service on a Sunday all the different ways you can serve in our church, to give you an introduction to serving. And then what we want you to do is to sign up to do kind of a first try serving in a certain role for 3 or 4 weeks. You won't have all the responsibility of it. You'll just be a part of it. You'll get to see what happens, decide if that's a good fit. Then we're going to ask you to commit to a role and serve in that role. And then we're going to ask you to mentor someone else to serve in that role. That's what a serving generosity pathway looks like, right? And we'll do the same thing for maybe leading a small group. We want you to start with exploring attending a small group. Then we want you to actually attend one, then help lead one, then lead one, then mentor someone else. What does that pathway, that generosity discipleship pathway, look like? Here's one example. The book that I mentioned earlier by Gibbs, it has several examples that are just kind of variations of this. Stages of Givers that all start with P, that's one example of a discipleship pathway. Here's what a pre-giver is. This is someone not giving yet. Pretty straightforward. Maybe they have some skepticism. Maybe they don't trust the church when it comes to managing finances. But maybe they're just about ready to kind of dip their toes in the water and give. See what happens. See, does God bless them? Is it something that brings them joy? The next step, periodic givers. They're practicing the discipline of generosity, but there's not a level of consistency. And oftentimes there's other inconsistency, right? They are only attending every 2 or 3 months. And when they attend, they give, but there's not consistency in that attendance or giving. So they give occasionally, but not consistently. There's no plan for every month this amount, or every week, or every year. Then you have proactive givers. These are givers who they are giving consistently. It's weekly or monthly, but they're just saying, maybe it's $20 every time I'm there, or it's $20 every month. They are not looking at, in terms of what I manage, what portion of that am I giving from a stewardship perspective. Once they do that, that's where the next level is, percentage givers. Where I'm saying, hey, this is what God has blessed me with. He's blessed me with an annual income of $60,000, and so I'm going to give this percentage. I'm going to give 5%, so I'm going to give $3,000 this year. I'm going to give 10%, so I'm going to give $6,000 this year. Those are percentage givers in this model called stages of givers. And then lastly, our partner givers. These are people who feel like they buy in so much to the mission of the church, to the mission of being a disciple, a follower of Jesus, that they say, you know what? Even whatever percentage I'm giving now, I'm going beyond that. I give whatever percent of my income, but you know what? For the next 2 years, I'm not going to buy a new piece of clothing. And my clothing budget is going to go to funding some strategic generosity initiative that I have. So that's one example of stages of givers. Nelson Searcy has something he calls the generosity ladder, which is very similar, just different wording. Different consulting companies like us, Generis, have different wording as well. That's one example of that, what that pathway looks like. So if you're going to disciple people in their generosity journey, figure out what that pathway looks like so that you can see if you're moving people along that journey or not. All right, the third way to increase giving and generosity in your church, plan to facilitate greater generosity. So if you as a church are thinking about, man, we would love to reach more young families, you would develop a plan for how you engage more young families. If you as a church want to grow generosity and giving at your church, you should develop a plan for how to facilitate that. What does it look like? Think about your church, where people are at, spiritual age, chronological age in terms of involvement in your church. That can be a part of that conversation. Hey, we have a lot of young people in our church. How do we engage them when it comes to giving? For example, if you have a lot of young people in your church, but you don't have any opportunity for online giving, okay, you need to figure out a plan for bridging that gap, because we see higher engagement in online giving when it comes to young folks than we do older folks. Side note, something we encounter in our world, generation expectation when it comes to what's safe, what's secure in terms of opening an investment. So if I talk to an older person and I say, you can fill out your application online. You can put it all in there, you can sign it electronically, you can open it that way. They say, oh no, I don't feel comfortable putting my social security number and birth date in on a web form. I'll do a print form. I talk to someone in their 20s and I provide them a print form and they say, oh no, I never write my social security number and date of birth down, because once I give you that paper, I have no idea where that goes. If I'm on a website, I can see that it's a secure form, it's encrypted. That's safer than me putting it on paper and handing it to you. So it's just interesting, that disconnect. They both would say they have an understanding of what is safe, but it's very different in practice. Same thing with how people give. And so just recognizing, hey, we may need to make this a little bit easier based on how people prefer to give. I know of a church during COVID, they did not have online giving at the time that things got shut down during the pandemic. And so I remember reading their communication where they were talking through with people how you can continue to give when they didn't have an online giving platform. And it included requesting that an elder come to your home to pick up the check.
Oh my gosh.
I just thought, oh, guys, can you see that maybe you're missing something here? Just set up the online giving. Another aspect of this, think about 2023 and 2024. You tend to think about the church calendar when it comes to planning sermon series and what holidays are in there. Think about giving and generosity. When are times that we should talk about that? A couple of times that we have found are really helpful, good seasons to talk about generosity. November is oftentimes a good season for a couple of reasons. One is Thanksgiving is there. And giving can very naturally be a part of expressing thanks to God for what he's entrusted you with, how he's blessed you. But also a lot of people think about their giving at the end of the year, especially those who give and have tax implications related to their charitable giving. And so you have folks trying to determine before the year ends, should I be giving more or not, and where is that going to go? And here's the thing, if you don't provide a year-end giving opportunity to your church, every other charitable organization out there will. They are getting multiple mailings from Compassion, World Vision, everywhere else about their year-end giving. Have you provided that opportunity and put it on people's radar? So that November going into the end of year. First of year can be as well. It's kind of a resolution season. It's kind of a season when people are trying to make efforts toward things they've always wanted to kind of do. And so that can be a good season. And then I would say the third season, and this is purely practical, is kind of the end of the school year, like a May, June. The practical thing is, especially with options like online giving, summer tends to be a pretty inconsistent season for attendance. And so reminding people what we would do in the church plant I pastored, we would say, hey, we often tell you that as disciples, our discipleship journey here at the church is that we celebrate, we connect, and we contribute. And we talked about what those things are. Celebrate is we engage with one another in worship, and we create community as we gather in worship. That was celebrate, and giving is a part of that. We talked about connect, that's our groups and our community doing life together, and then contribute, we serve, and we're generous. And we said, hey, this is coming into a season. I know in Wisconsin, summers are short. They're beautiful, but last year it was on a Friday, right? They're short. And so we know you're going to go out and enjoy it. But hey, we don't stop being disciples of Jesus during that. So make sure you're celebrating and you're connecting and you're contributing this summer. And here's what that may look like. And so we were letting people know how they could watch services online. We changed up our group formats so that they didn't meet every week and they were a little more activity focused. So you didn't feel like, well, I missed the last 2 weeks discussion, so I don't want to go tonight. Because it's a hiking group, it doesn't matter that you missed the last one. You can still go and hike together and be in community. So that's kind of that third optimal time as you're planning that. Part of that planning is to do a giving audit. A giving audit. Here's something that an online giving provider known as PushPay put together. They said you can identify giving in your church in terms of where people are at in their giving history. So they said, take a look at how many first-time givers you have in the last year. So these are people who gave for the first time in this specific range. How many do we have, and what does it look like to encourage and facilitate a second gift? Second-time givers, what are people who've given 2 times in that range? How do we move them toward the occasional range, and so on, to regular givers? So using a metric like that to sort of do a giving audit. Now, they mention a couple of other categories. And we'll talk about how you measure this and identify it it could be controversial if you're looking at people's giving. We'll talk about that in a second. But a couple of other areas to look are at-risk givers, meaning someone who has consistently given, but in the last couple months hasn't. Maybe they're about to stop contributing in any way. Why is that? Now, here's the thing, that may be an indication of some major thing happening in their life. Maybe they had a death in the family and you just don't know that yet. And it's an opportunity to reach out and just engage. Just say, hey, I was thinking about you. Anything going on in life that we can be praying about you for? Another group is top givers. Remember what I said earlier about my friend Ron. He wanted to help grow in terms, be helped in growing as a generous person. And so there are some churches that have strategies to thank those who are some of their largest givers. And something about large donors, typically, if I am one of the top donors at your church, I believe in what you do, and that's why I'm giving, but I want to know that that gift makes a difference. I don't have to be recognized for it, but I'm making a decision about that large amount of money that I'm giving. And I got a letter from my sponsored child overseas, and I know how my money makes a difference, and maybe I want to sponsor maybe that's how my gift makes a difference. So I want to know that in the case of my friend Ron, he would say that he feels a burden to make sure that he's honoring God in the best ways with what he has. And so if it's not going to make a difference here, he wants to give it somewhere that it does make a difference. And so finding ways to help your top givers see how their giving makes a difference is another part of that plan and part of that giving audit. Now, after you do that audit, do some additional measuring. How does this compare to a couple years ago? Do we have more first-time givers currently than we did a couple years ago? Or are we seeing fewer first-time givers? And is it because we have fewer first-time guests? If we have more first-time guests but fewer first-time givers, there's a disconnect somewhere. We aren't helping people move forward in that journey. Those different categories of givers, how has that changed since before the pandemic? Here's what I can tell you most churches saw as they looked at their giving through the pandemic season and following. Most churches had fewer donors giving larger gifts. So we saw churches whose giving remained the same. And they thought, wow, this is amazing. Our giving remained the same. But they had half the number of donors that they had before. So they had fewer givers, but they were giving more. Probably for a couple of reasons. We saw churches talk about giving methods more than any other season during COVID. And so people who were committed to supporting the work of the church probably did automate it and became more consistent than they had been before, and that resulted in them giving more. I always wanted to be a person who gave $100 every week. I just forgot about it the weeks that it wasn't there. They encouraged me to automate it. Now I do, and I actually am giving $100 a week, which is what I thought I was giving, but practically I wasn't. So that helps you assess where you're at as you look over time, where people were at in those different levels of giving. I said that I would talk to you about how you do it in a way that makes people more comfortable. So first off, any church that provides donor receipts for tax purposes, so at the end of the year you probably provide giving statements, someone processes those. And folks understand someone has to process those. It's not an unreasonable expectation, I don't think, for people to have that that's the only person, that there's one person who sees that. Like, we're careful about who sees that. That's not an unreasonable expectation. There are ways that you can look at people's giving without knowing who gave it. So the person who does have that full access, if you will, can provide a report that eliminates all the names. And we have household A, household B, household C. And we see household A in this year did this, the following year did this, and the following year did this. And you're not seeing what any individual, you don't know who that individual is, but you can see how their generosity path has gone. And you can see if people are moving. So there are ways that you can do it that still honors that protection of privacy and the concerns that folks have. And so you can say with integrity, I think it is, we're in a season where transparency is valued. I think it is totally okay to say, hey, here's our commitment that we make to all of our donors, there's only one person who actually knows how much people give because they have to prepare your statements, and that is so-and-so. Or that is our finance secretary, whatever. I think that's a healthy transparency. Obviously, you need to honor that if that's a commitment that you make. So you can look at giving trends without disclosing who's giving what, and we ask churches to do it all the time when we're trying to help them with a generosity initiative. Where are people at now so we can see where people could be? Another way to increase giving and generosity in your church, communicate about the church's finances. Remember, we're in a season where people really value transparency, authenticity, openness. They don't trust organizations that are hiding things, that aren't disclosing things. See if this looks familiar to anybody.
Too familiar.
Anybody have one of these in your church building? Okay.
On Sunday.
Yes. All right. So usually you had two of these, one on each side up front. The other one had the hymnal numbers, the hymn numbers. So attendance today, attendance last Sunday, offering today, offering last Sunday, and offering a year ago. Okay, first off, I want to know what church this is, because if you have 338 people and your offering today was 832, we need to do a capital campaign there yesterday. I can help you. And offering last Sunday was even worse, right? So I show this as an example, partly to have a little bit of fun with it. Obviously, I was in a church a few months ago where I saw this and took a picture, not this one, but a picture of one. Here's what we often do when it comes to communicating about giving in our church, financial reporting. We will say, here's what last week's offering was. Here's what the offering a year ago was. Here you're seeing today, last Sunday, and a year ago. Usually we add one more, and it's the budgeted need. Like, based on where we're at in the year, our budgeted need is this, and then we try to compare. All right, there's a couple problems with how we typically report that weekly need and where we're at in comparison. So sometimes we'll add year-to-date giving, year-to-date need, okay? Here's the problem. That completely ignores the giving cycle that is natural in every church. So the typical church, if you have a January to December fiscal year, you will be behind budgeted need the first 11 months of the year and make it up in the 12th month. So for 11 months, you are communicating, we are behind, we are behind, we are behind, we are behind, we are behind. Hallelujah, we caught up. When you do things like last Sunday and a year ago, what if a year ago, someone had just gotten an inheritance and they tithed off it? So our giving was $5,000 higher that Sunday than it normally is, and a year ago compared to a year ago, we looked terrible. Well, we didn't have that inheritance gift, tithe of an inheritance gift come in. There are holidays that shift, right? So when Easter can impact that. Easter tends to be a good giving Sunday in churches, and if a year ago was Easter, but today isn't, it looks like we're down from a year ago. When spring break lands. So in Wisconsin, a lot of our schools used to time Easter and spring break together. And it was like this mixed bag. So like Easter attendance would go up a little bit, but you had all your spring break travel that brought it down too. And so Christmas was always a bigger deal by far, attendance-wise, than Easter in Wisconsin because of that. Now it floats more. So my suggestion when it comes to communicating about the church's finances, I have two. If you're going to report like that, I think it is healthy to report, but here's what I recommend. Report in a season-adjusted way, and there's two ways you can do that. You can always do a 12-month rolling, because then you're incorporating all those ebbs and flows, all the seasonal stuff. You have a December in there, and you have a July in there. So always look at the 12-month that incorporates those ebbs and flows a little better. If you have a bookkeeper really good with spreadsheets, really good with calculations, you can also do a projection based on previous monthly percentages. Here's what that looks like. You look at January giving for the last 5 years, And you see, okay, in January we usually get about 9% of our annual budget, or our annual giving. And in February we usually get this percentage. So you look at historically, and then your budget, you build that way. So if your annual budget is $200,000, your budget says in January, this is our budget, 9% of that, and so on. So that it incorporates some of those ebbs and flows a little bit better. And then you show, so your budget now is not just a straight, the total number divided by 52. It's now based historically on what happens. This is our budget. We anticipate receiving it this way. I think that is more accurate than this up and down that continue, and even within a month. People who give every other week, those in-between weeks are smart. So 15th and end of month, you tend to see bumps. And so and then you have a 5 Sunday month, and that throws it all off. So that just gives you a little bit better tool for doing that. Ultimately, though, for most people, I say most people, you have a couple people, they probably come to mind as I say this, who want the full financial report every month. They want the line items. They want to know how much went where. Have that available for those 2 people. Everybody else at your church throws it away without reading it because they don't have time to read it. It's more, they don't understand a lot of it. They trust and just don't need that level. But what almost everyone really wants to know, are we meeting expenses? Are we bleeding money? Are we taking in more than we're spending? And so I think providing year-to-date income and year-to-date expenses is an even better disclosure, if you're wanting to be transparent, than our budgeted need and where we are in relation to that. Because if you're not getting the budget, hopefully you're cutting expenses, and people want to see that. And if you estimated some growth into the budget and it's not happening, you probably didn't spend more than you're receiving, but it looks like it because you had such a high budgeted need. So that's really what people are wondering. Are we meeting expenses or not? So that's an important part of reporting. When you communicate about church's finances, we need to normalize money talk so that people don't feel uncomfortable. Oh boy, we haven't talked about money in 2 years. Here it is. If all of a sudden it's something that is a regular part of all the different things you talk about people getting involved in serving, getting involved in Sunday school or a small group, we talk about generosity, we talk about money. It's simply something that we do. So normalize that, and then do some impact reports. And that ties to the making a difference thing. So I mentioned other nonprofits and what they do. The truth is, other nonprofits tend to be much better when it comes to communicating with their donors than churches with people who are not giving at the level that they're giving to your church. So the truth is, we sponsor a child through Compassion. We get more communication from Compassion about our giving at $39 a month than we do from our church. We give significantly more than that to our church. But Compassion communicates with us more to appreciate the generosity, to share the story of how that boy's life is different because of our gift. As a church, we should be better, and I'm calling that impact reporting. With your annual giving statements, many churches have started including an annual report. Make that an impact report. This is the difference that our church made this year in the lives of people in our community because of your generosity. Infographics I love. Here's the thing, I think that's a good start. I suggest we learn from Compassion and take it a step further. If every church did what I asked, here's what I would ask them. Do not send annual giving statements with impact reports. Send quarterly. Send a quarterly giving statement and a quarterly impact report. As a donor, I like seeing where I'm at so far for the year. I want to keep up with my intentions. And being reminded each quarter where I'm at helps me see, oh, we had planned on increasing and I forgot to do that. but also being reminded, here's the difference that was made in someone's life because of that generosity. Now, initially, if you don't do any kind of impact report, I would start with the annual one, do that for a year, then maybe the next year go to quarterly. Initially it may seem like, wow, they're communicating a lot about this, but it will become a part of just being natural. Our church sends us this every quarter. Oh, look at the cool things that our church did this quarter.
Hey, Jerod.
Yes.
How would you recommend for a small church that doesn't have a financial secretary?
Sure.
Or
Yep.
it's just me?
Yep. So you can do impact reports without giving statements.
Okay.
So you could just send it almost like a newsletter. You're sort of reviving probably your church did a newsletter at some point. You probably don't do one now, if you're like most churches.
Yeah.
So it sort of becomes, but you tie it to stories of impact rather than here's the upcoming events. That's what the newsletters used to be. Here's the upcoming events that we want you to know about. Instead, here's the impact our church is making in our community and how your generosity, and so you can do it without the statements. And that brings up a good point. If you are sending quarterly statements and the impact report, I would also send the impact report to everybody in your database that is not receiving a giving statement. And I would include a letter with the impact report that says we're so thankful to our donors who have made this happen. So you're not acknowledging whether they're a donor or not in that letter. We're thankful to our donors who have made that happen. If you have not yet started supporting what we do, here's how to get started. So you're not calling anybody out. As far as they know, they didn't realize they got a different letter than other people because it didn't have a giving statement in it. But you include that in there because they see the impact and are invited to participate. So impact reports a good way to communicate. I think even what you measure and therefore communicate is important. I have a document up here. That's the old version of it on screen. I had our marketing guy make it a little bit better. How your leadership can assess how you're doing financially. Some metrics you can look at. Again, we tend to look at, okay, what was giving last week? What was giving a year ago? What's our per capita giving? How are we doing financially? Here are some other metrics you can use. So you can grab this off the table here at the end of the workshop. But we say that every church leader should know some things about your church's finances. And there are probably better things to know than what last week's giving was, because there are some more important things to measure. In fact, we have a little workshop that we do called 3 Financial Measures Every Church Leader Should Know. So anybody on the CFR team, if you're in my region, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, happy to walk an elder board or a church board or a finance team through that. If you're in another region, the local CFR guy can get you in contact with that person, and they would be happy to walk you through it as well. 3 financial measures every church leader should know. At any time, church leader ought to know where your church is at on these 3 things as of the last financial report, which is hopefully not more than 30 days old. And lastly, the last way to increase giving and generosity in your church, integrate generosity into the life of your church. It should just feel like this is a part of who we are. And so you have some things that probably happen every Sunday at your church. You probably sing some songs. There's probably a sermon. Probably take communion. What do you do at the time of giving? Be strategic with that. I know of one church, this is a large church that is a partner church with us. Every Sunday at the time of giving, they have what they call the generosity moment. And they highlight a story of impact, one of those impact stories. It may be an interview with a missionary that they support. It may be an update on where the church is at financially. But they intentionally, around that time of giving, share some kind of a story of impact. Now, not every church has the resources to try to prepare something in that way. But rather than this is the time when the buckets get passed and this is the prayer that gets prayed, can we be strategic about talking about generosity and this whole experience just a natural part of who we are? We often highlight stories of impact. Somebody who's baptized, share their story of how their life was changed. Vacation Bible School, we share how many kids and how cool it was. What about someone sharing how, as they tried being generous for the first time, they experienced the joy that the Bible promises? Having those simply be a part of who you are as a church. We talk about this. We celebrate this. There are some misperceptions about giving that you want to try and counteract. And that's where this integrating generosity into the life of your church will help. There's the quid pro quo approach, that if I give at this level, God blesses me at this level. And kind of viewing it as an exchange. That's obviously not a healthy approach to generosity. The all or nothing idea. Often these are folks that are motivated by guilt, and then they feel like, if I can't give at this level this month, then I've already messed up, I just will not give anything. So countering that, and then so that's fueled by guilt, all or nothing. Fueled by fear, and I'm afraid someone at the church might know that I don't give, and so I'm going to give a little bit. So changing that so that it's truly a motivation of joy. That's a result of integrating generosity into the life of your church. So I said, tale of two pairs of shoes. First time in Haiti, had a chance to give away my shoes. I didn't. Years later, a couple decades later, found myself in Colorado attending a pastor's conference. Another pastor was with me. There was a homeless man. We sat down for a while to do some reading. Before the conference started, there was a homeless man on the bench next to us. And I could see that the boots he was wearing were worn out, and the soles were hanging off the front of the boot. I don't know why, but it meant I could see his exposed foot. I could see his sock worn through to his heel and the balls of his feet. And I was thinking about the tennis shoes that I was wearing and how much better they were. And I realized I had some flip-flops in the trunk of the rental car. And I thought, I could pass the shoes test this time. I could give this guy my shoes. And so I did. And the other pastor that was with me, I didn't know it at the time, he took a photo of me when I was giving the shoes to this man. And a few weeks later, he sent it to me. And he said, I didn't want to cheapen the moment by telling you I captured this photo, but I wanted to send it to you in case you can use it to motivate generosity in others. And I thought, that's so cool. I've captured the moment when I passed the shoes test. And then I realized the exact moment that he captured. So it's kind of hard to see, but I'm holding something in my hand. It's kind of orange there. Before I gave the man my shoes, I took out the cushioned inserts that I bought.
Oh, no.
And took them home. Even when I think I'm being generous, God reminds me how greedy I still can be. So, the whole point of that is my prayer for everyone sitting in all of our churches. We never reach the point where we think we've got this generosity thing all figured out. That we always remember God's calling us to reach higher. He's trying to teach us more. And if you ever think you fully conform to Jesus in every way, ask your spouse. They'll let you know how you're not quite there yet. All right, that's everything that I've got. I'm told lunch is ready and the next group is ready to come in. So my contact info is here. If you have questions, reach out to me. Feel free to pick up a business card, take one of these Where We Stand Financially pictures.